Morning, everybody. It's 10 a.m. and it's time to resume the hearing session into the examination of the submitted Crawley Borough Local Plan to 2040. Can everyone hear and see me? Thank you. My name's Glenn Rawlings, and with me is David Spencer, and most of you have seen us already. We're the inspectors that have been appointed to examine. We've been appointed by the Secretary of State under Section 20 of the 2004 Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act to carry out the independent examination of the submitted plan. If you haven't already, could you put your mobile phones onto silent or switch them off, please? There are one or two new faces here today, so we'll repeat what we've said on previous days. Firstly, that we have Charlotte Glancy with us, who most of you will met. She's the Program Officer for the examination. She's the point of contact if you have any queries about the examination process or need to locate an examination document. She's based here in the Town Hall with us while the hearings are sitting, and otherwise her contact details are available on the examination website. I'll now pass over to her to ask her to set out some important housekeeping rules.
Morning, everyone. This is just a few housekeeping rules in relation to recording the sessions and the fire drills. So there are no scheduled fire drills. So in the event of a fire alarm sounding, please leave the building via the main spiral staircase and through the main entrance doors. Once outside, please turn left and make your way to the fire assembly point located beyond the Town Hall multi-storey car park on Exchange Road. If you're unable to use the stairs, please wait in the chamber and you will be guided by a member of staff to the evacuation lift. These sessions are being filmed and recorded to be later uploaded on the Council's YouTube site. So to be aware that the Council is a data controller under the Data Protection Act. Data collected during a webcast will be retained in accordance with the Council's published policy, and the specific hearing sessions will be retained for at least 2 years. Any individual seated around the chamber and in the public gallery will be filmed by the automated camera system, and your image may be captured. Therefore, by entering the room, you are consenting to being filmed and the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and/or training purposes. I think everything with the mics is quite self-explanatory. You just press the right-hand button to speak. They're quite sensitive, so you don't need to move them. The toilets are located out of this door, men's on the right and ladies through the doors to the left. Many thanks.
Thanks, Charlotte. We're here today to discuss matter 4, issue 3. Hopefully everyone's on the same page there. Good. The aim of the hearing sessions is for us to understand further whether the plan's sound or not, and what changes may be necessary in order for the plan to be found sound. Those who have indicated that they wish to be heard will be able to speak and make contributions in this hearing session this morning. We do have a number of questions based on the agenda that's been previously published. If we don't ask a question but you wish to speak, please put your nameplate up on its end and we'll get to you as soon as possible. I may have some visibility problems to the back row, so if I don't see that your nameplate's up, feel free to signal to me in another way and get my attention. Also, my eyesight's not that great, and having my glasses on and off, looking for distance and here is confusing to everybody, so as I said, feel free to signal. We're going to have a short mid-morning break at some point, and we'll hopefully finish no later than 1 p.m. We do have some reserve time this afternoon if we do go later, but our preference is to finish at 1 p.m, and I'm sure it's yours as well. Any questions on how the sessions work? Great, thank you. Now, as I said, there are some new people here, and also for the purposes of recording, it would be nice to have some introductions again, so I'll start with the Council, please.
Good morning, sir. My name's Anthony Masson. I'm a Senior Planning Officer at Crawley Borough Council. Alongside me today I have David Forsdick, KC, and Sally Lepage, Strategic Planning Manager at the Council.
Thank you. We have is it the County Council here today as well?
Hello, I'm Guy Parfait from West Sussex County Council. Transport Planning and Policy team.
Thank you. National Highways. Oh, sorry.
I'm West Sussex County Council as well. My name is Eric Singh. I work alongside Guy Parford at West Sussex County Council. Transport Policy and Planning.
Siri, is it? Mr.
So, Singh.
Sorry, I don't have that on my list, so that's great. Thank you. National Highways.
So Simon Fife from Savills, representing Gatwick Green.
Oh,
Limited.
sorry. What's the second one?
Tony Cross, acting on behalf of Gatwick Green.
Thank you very much. Do we have someone from National Highways here today? Ah. Figuratively or?
Nigel DeWitt, National Highways.
Thank you. Sorry, I've jumped the gulf here. Thank you to Gatwick Green for agreeing to sit over this side. We figured as you weren't a million miles apart from the council, that side would be appropriate, and also to free up a bit of space here, but it seems that the problem's now over there in terms of geographic distribution, so sorry about that. Could I hear from, perhaps Gatwick Airport first, please?
Good morning, sir. My name's Tim Norwood from Gatwick Airport Limited. I'm joined today by, on my right-hand side, Dave Ellis from Arup, and joined behind me by Heather Sargent, who you will have met yesterday from Council, Lydia Granger, our GAL Planning Manager, and Andy Hunt from Quad.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the front row who hasn't introduced themselves yet?
Good morning, sir. Michael Rees from LRM Planning on behalf of WT Land Properties. And I've got oodles of space here.
Great. But we were looking at the vinyl map at the back and thought maybe we could move it down if there's some space today, but that's useful. Thank you. Back row, please.
Good morning, sirs. I'm Suzanne Holloway from Vale Williams on behalf of Ardmore Limited.
Morning, sirs. Graham Keane, King's Counsel on behalf of Ardmore.
Is there anyone else who wishes to participate who hasn't introduced themselves?
Yes, at the back here, sir. It's John Williams from Steer on behalf of Gatwick Green.
Mark Pearney, Savills on behalf of Gatwick Green. Morning.
James Pereira on behalf of Gatwick Green. Unlikely to speak today, but yeah.
Nick Mayer, Mark MacDonald, also on behalf of Gatwick Green.
Anyone else? Great, thank you. Okay then, so as I mentioned, there's an agenda for today. Following yesterday's session, we've cut down the questions that we were expecting to ask today, as there was a bit of overlap, inevitably. There will probably be a bit of overlap today. If you feel like you're repeating something from yesterday, don't be afraid if you think it illustrates one of the questions on the agenda, or if it raises something new or even strengthens your case, that's fine. It will probably help us as well. The questions that we've deleted are mostly from the earlier questions on the agenda, or the earlier points on the agenda, as particularly in terms of economic impact and employment growth, but I do have a few sort of supplementary questions which we'll get into this morning as well. And as with yesterday, there'll probably be some issues with parking overlapping today as well. Just a reminder that we do have a session to specifically discuss parking issues in the new year, or the parking policy, GAT3, so anything that can be reserved for that session, we'd appreciate it.
Could I just raise something on that? We were assuming, and I think it follows from the matters and questions, that issues as to the appropriateness of Gatwick Green in the context of the impact on the long stay car parking area was for today, not for matter 10.
That's fine. That would be helpful to us. Thank you.
Could I also raise one other procedural matter? Gatwick's, this goes to something that was raised yesterday, and that there's been some progress or some developments on it. Gatwick's representations said that there had been no engagement on Gatwick Green's allocation before the 2021 Regulation 19. And my learned friend, on instructions, and no criticism of her at all, but on instructions, she repeated that yesterday. And you might have seen that I waved a pack of emails at that point, and she said that she hadn't seen any, which is perfectly fair. She hadn't seen it, and that's no problem there. But the factual assertion in the reps that there wasn't engagement is simply factually wrong. There was engagement, there were emails, there was a full meeting, and all before the Regulation 19. And Gatwick raised no significant issues with Gatwick Green at that point. Even though they knew the full details of Gatwick Green's proposals from the 2015 local plan. So the factual assertion in Gatwick's representations is simply wrong, and when we investigated the background to that assertion, it turned out that they weren't making any of the points they now make prior to the Regulation 19. Which I'll come back to when I hear what Gatwick say.
Great, thank you. We do have a question on communications between Gal and the council specifically, but we can weave that in at the time. With that in mind, I will ask Gatwick to respond now, though.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I can see that this was question 4.21, and my view is that it was on the agenda for this morning, so I'm happy to come back to it later on if that's appropriate.
Is there anything you want to say directly in response now?
It's really Mr. Norwood who was involved in this, sir, so I'll...
Great, thank you. Anything else from you, Mr. Sorry. Somebody else?
Sorry, yes, sir. Did you want to hear from myself from Gatwick Airport?
Yes, please.
Okay, so we were shared copies of the correspondence yesterday from Crawley, and I think it's fair to say that we did receive an email from the head of planning at Crawley Borough Council at the end of August 2020. We very much clearly made the point that we were very willing to discuss with Crawley the proposals. And a meeting did take place, I think in probably about the October time, just before the committee report was published in the November, which set out for the first time the Gatwick Green allocation. So that was the first time we'd seen the specific allocation in the committee report, which went to their scrutiny committee in the November, before it was published for the Regulation 19 consultation in the January. And from memory, but this was right in the middle of COVID, sir, so you can imagine running an international airport. I had quite a lot of things on my plate at that time. All I would say is that we were made aware a couple of weeks before the Regulation 19 report went to their committee in that November. A meeting, a 1-hour Teams meeting did take place with their planning team. I think it's a bit unfair to say that at no time were significant issues raised. We didn't really know what the concept was going to be, because certainly no drawings were shared with me at that stage. And the first time, as I say, we saw the detail of the Gatwick Green scheme was in the committee report, which was presented in the November. So we're literally talking here about a few weeks. And I think what we were presented with is Crawley saying, this is the allocation that we're going to make. And this is a bit strange, really, because as Crawley absolutely know, we have a legal agreement with them, a long-standing legal agreement, a Section 106 agreement, that makes it very clear, and I'll give you the reference to the legal agreement. It's EGSM/GA/05, which places an absolute obligation on Crawley, which has been in that legal agreement for years and years, to meet with myself as the Chief Planning Officer at Gatwick Airport on at least 2 occasions every year to provide feedback on emerging planning, transport, or environmental policies of relevance to the operation and development of the airport. Just for your reference, sir, that is obligation 10.2. And at no time in those meetings was this matter raised. At no time in these meetings were we provided with a draft of a statement of common ground. There was no discussion in those meetings about the allocation of Gatwick Green or the impact it would have on the airport. So yes, I'm very happy to confirm that a meeting and some quick email exchanges did take place in the few weeks running up to the Regulation 19 going to their committee, but at no stage did substantive discussions take place on the impact it would have on the operation of the airport.
Thank you. I think it would be useful if we stayed on this question and saw it through. Mr. Forsdick, I see you want to speak.
Yeah, that's just factually wrong, all that's just been said. First of all, what's just been said is an admission that the factual statement in the Gatwick's hearing statement is wrong. There was engagement. Secondly, the first email wasn't just a last-minute email. It was an email at plan evolution stage in August 2020, which specifically raised, we want to release land at Gatwick East. And it went through in a page or so. It talked about the call for sites. It talked about the needs, the economic needs of the area, and the need and the inefficient use of car parking space. So, slam dunk raised in August at Regulation 19 evolution stage. That was in August. No response in September. We sent a chasing email. October. The council pressed again, and Mr. Norwood said would be willing to engage in further discussions. That was in October. We chased for a meeting date, and eventually a meeting was held on the 3rd of November, which was for the purpose of considering the Gatwick Green allocation, which Mr. Norwood knew full well was that which had been previously promoted in 2015. So there was no question that everyone knew what the issue was. It was the same issue as had been in front of the inspector in 2015. That meeting led to, in that meeting, no fundamental objections were raised, and in the light of what Mr. Norwood just said, I am going to read out a passage of an email back recording that meeting where Gatwick made a link between support for Gatwick Green and Crawley's support for a DCO. And the note, our email back that was never rebutted of the 12th of November 2020 said this: you, Mr. Norwood, considered that any in principle support from Gatwick for changes to safeguarding and the Gatwick Green allocation would be conditional, provided that as part of the draft statement of common ground, we that's namely Crawley, give consideration to the aspirations for the DCO. So basically it was being said, quid pro quo, we won't object to Gatwick Green if you support the DCA. And no issue in principle, even now it's not being said there was any in principle issue raised by Mr Norwood in that meeting about Gatwick Green. So what's being said now is completely contrary to the engagement that happened prior to the Regulation 19 statement.
Thank you. I'll come back to you in a moment, Mr Norwood. Mr Forsdick, just a supplementary question from Mr Norwood's evidence there. Is there any bearing, does the Section 106 have any bearing on the local plan process?
Only insofar as it tells you about the surface access strategy and the percentage mode share requirements and working together. In terms of this point, in terms of safeguarding, it doesn't have any bearing there.
In terms of the communication process, is that also the same?
There's engagement, I think twice a year, I think it is, under various paragraphs actually, and on various matters. This was a separate stream specifically on the safeguarding for Gatwick and the allocation of Gatwick Green. So this was almost like a separate tranche, a separate line of engagement.
To ask a question as well.
Thank you. Can I just be clear from the Borough Council, is it intending to submit any further documentation to this examination which it feels would be useful to us? I mean, it's one thing having things waved in front of us and extracts read to us, but obviously we're sort of slightly blindsided by not seeing the source material unless we've missed it somewhere in the plethora of documents that are already before us.
Well, there was an email last night, I think, saying to Gatwick if they withdrew what they said yesterday in the opening session this morning, the first thing, then we wouldn't be submitting this document. But obviously they haven't withdrawn it; they've tried to bolster it. So yes, I'll put in the email chain.
Okay, and well, we'll take a view on whether we'll obviously that will be provided through the programme officer, and we'll take a view on that. Can I just, sorry, Mr Rawlings, I've got just a further supplementary question or thought to me. Has the council at any time sought to enter into a statement of common ground with Gatwick Airport, even if it's ultimately a statement that says this is what we don't agree on, that would kind of iron out some of these, what seem to me to be just matter of fact kind of issues?
Yes, and you'll see that in the email chain. Repeatedly, we saying, can we enter into a draft statement of common ground, please?
That's okay. You asked a question that I was going to ask, so that was really useful. Yes. Mr Norwood.
Thank you, sir. I think it will be certainly helpful to release the emails because I think they will show that Gatwick was very willing. I think that was the words I actually used. Very willing. So there was, as Mr Forsdick has said, there was one email at the end of August, in the middle of COVID. There was a chase-up email, and I responded within a few days of that chase-up email, saying that we, Gatwick Airport, would be very willing to have further discussion with you and better understand how we could contribute to your work. I agree that ongoing dialogue and close cooperation provides the right way to work together to support not just the recovery of the airport, because we were dealing with the effects, but also the future prosperity and recovery of Crawley. So it was absolutely clear that I was more than willing to have this dialogue with the council's officers. A meeting did take place. As I say, it was a 1-hour Teams meeting. And the matter was discussed, but at no stage did we agree to on the proposal. And I believe it was left with Crawley to start the preparation of the draft of a section of a statement of common ground. And it was Crawley who were be producing a first draft of the statement of common ground to share with GAL. And unfortunately, that first draft has certainly, in my knowledge, has never appeared. We have certainly not got a draft statement of common ground from the council. And I think the Section 106 agreement, if I may say, I think it is relevant here. Because that is an obligation. It's obligation 10.2 to meet with myself to discuss the emerging planning, transport and environmental policies or issues of relevance to the operation of the airport. And sorry, if Mr. Fosdick, if I could speak. We have not discussed this in any detail with Crawley, either as part of separate discussions or as part of the actual obligation in the legal agreement. We have not received a draft statement of common ground from Crawley on these matters. And we have repeatedly said to Crawley, and I have repeatedly said to Crawley, and I will make the same statement again today, that we are very willing to talk to them and discuss these matters. I have got no problem with that whatsoever.
Would any discussion that takes place, in your view, resolve a fundamental opposition to the allocation of Gatwick Green?
There's a huge amount of work that goes into a master plan, as you can imagine. And a master plan is a bit like a jigsaw, I guess. All of the different elements of the jigsaw, you need all of the pieces to make the final master plan. So to take out a large chunk of what is essential development to support the operation of the airport, there would need to be very careful consideration as to what the alternative solutions would be. And that would mean that you would have to work together very carefully and closely. And as far as I'm aware, the Crawley Borough Council planning team are not airport master planners. GAL has its own airport master planning team and is used to preparing airport master plans. This is our job, basically. And so it would have to be quite a detailed collaborative exercise, not one which starts a couple of weeks before the allocation goes into their draft Regulation 19 document. It would take, if I may say, it would probably take months of detailed work to go through what the implications would be.
Okay, and it's a separate process, I know, but are you aware of, well, in your awareness, is the DCO team or the examining inspectors there aware of this situation?
So I'm very well aware of the DCO process and right in the middle of it at the moment. I doubt if the examining authority, the 5-member panel, are aware of this issue. I doubt it very much. I think the relevant representation period for the DCO closed about a week ago. We haven't yet had the principal issues or matters from the 5-member panel, and the preliminary meeting, a date for the preliminary meeting hasn't been set yet, although I do believe it's going to be in the early part of next year. So I would be very surprised if they were aware of this issue, but I'm sure they would be aware of it in due course.
Ms. Sargent.
Thank you, Sis. I agree this email pack needs to be submitted so that you can see what everybody actually said rather than anyone paraphrasing it for you. But our point, as you'll have understood, is that in circumstances where the fact that Gatwick Green wanted this allocation to come forward has been known to everybody since at least 2015, so the last time the local plan looked at this, it's not adequate for the council to have waited until August 2020 to tell the airport that actually it too was now investigating and probably promoting that possibility. When you do receive the emails, says, if I could ask you in the first email, which is the 22nd of August, it's about halfway through the email. There's a paragraph that begins, "As you are aware," and I want to just respond to the notion that somehow the airport from this email was supposed to have understood exactly what was being proposed. You'll see halfway through that paragraph there's a reference to releasing some or all of this area from safeguarding would enable it to be considered for other uses. So it wasn't clear to us from this email exactly what was being proposed by the council. And the other point from this pack, when it gets to you, that I'd like you to note, please, sir, is there is a response from Mr. Norwood of the 13th of November 2020. It's a short email, and he says in terms, "As you'll appreciate, as regards the proposed strategic employment land allocation for industrial or warehousing at Gatwick Green, I will need to consider carefully how we respond once full details emerge as part of the draft local plan Reg 19 process." So it's not accurate or fair to suggest that the airport said, you know, we haven't got a problem with this. Mr. Norwood, as one would expect, stated in terms that he would need to think about it once full proper details had emerged. Thank you.
Thank you. Someone from Gatwick Green, Mr. Fife, would you like to...
Yeah, thank you, sir. I just wanted to sort of add a bit more colour to this painting. Gatwick Green Limited had a series of meetings with Gatwick Airport Limited between August 2019 and June 2021. So they started before the pandemic was in place. Those meetings were to discuss how a southern wide space runway infrastructure might operate alongside Gatwick Green. The evidence records the transport matters discussed and the intention to work towards a statement of common ground. The precise scope of the discussions is set out in Appendix 6 to our representation Reg 19 2023 055, and it lists there all the various infrastructure interface issues that were discussed with Gatwick Airport Limited. The process culminated in a sort of joint statement between Gatwick Airport Limited and the Wilkie Group, or Gatwick Green Limited, which set out the matters that were discussed and the intention of the parties to work together to a statement of common ground in the event that Gatwick Green was found to be a sound allocation. So I thought I'd mention that because, you know, it does illustrate quite clearly that we were engaging with Gatwick Airport Limited prior to the meetings that you've just been hearing about between Crawley Borough Council and GAL. And really this was reflecting several months' work by the Gatwick Green team to understand the master plan implications. But as a result of all that work and the meetings we had with GAL, nothing was produced by them in terms of any negative implications. And we've made representations on the DCO stating clearly that there are no technical interface issues between the DCO and Gatwick Green. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. It's clear we have differing views on both sides of the table here. I think it would be useful for us to see the emails before we proceed. And in due course, I think the best course of action for us would be to issue a note on the next steps on this matter.
Can I just say, I mean, obviously there can be difference of views as to what the facts show. There can't be difference of views as to what the facts are. And the facts are, despite Mr. Norwood's assertion that there wasn't a draft statement of common ground sent, there was one sent. So we're getting a pattern emerging of assertions that turn out just to be factually incorrect. There was one sent on the 20th of the first 21, never responded to by Gatwick. Mr. Norwood keeps on going on about, oh, it was just a couple of weeks before, it was months before, and no issue was raised then or in the 3rd of November meeting. No issue was raised, even though he knew full well what Gatwick Green was about. And to then complain at us for putting it in when he raised no issues in the meeting to discuss it seems a bit bizarre. So, of course, you'll have the full email chain. It will go to the programme officer now. If Gatwick want to add anything to it, then fine. But you'll get the full picture.
I think it would be fair to give you that opportunity, so that is open to you, and we'll sort that out through Charlotte. Okay, I look forward to getting to the bottom of it. Thank you. Okay then, so back to Gatwick on question 4.20 and the effect of the proposal or the allocation on airport operations. I've heard about the parking considerations, but feel free to bring them in. Other than the parking considerations, are there any other implications of the removal of the land from the safeguarded area on airport operations at all?
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I think if I take you to Gatwick Airport's master plan, which is reference in the examination library, e.g. SM/GA/06. And it's plan number 20, sir.
Mr. Spencer's finding that for me, but while he does, you could perhaps continue.
Okay. So as I think I said, a significant amount of work goes into developing as a master plan for an airport. Both the scheme itself and the overall context of the master plan. In fact, it's tens of millions of pounds worth of work that goes into the master plan. And as I said before, the airport is made up of quite a large number of components, all of which are needed to make the airport flow and run smoothly and efficiently. And it is. The airport is made up of a large number of jigsaw pieces. You have the terminal buildings, you have the piers, you have the control tower, you have offices and car parks, you have hotels, you have track transit systems, you have a support accommodation, you have hangars, cargo facilities, you actually have the runway and the taxiways themselves, you have car parks and you have road diversions. And all of that is put together in a large jigsaw that gives you your final picture. You simply can't take a few elements out of that jigsaw and expect it to be still complete. It's like you're missing a couple of the pieces. And you can imagine the sense of disappointment when you spend a lot of time and you find out you've got a few pieces that are missing. Usually happens to me at Christmas, but and I think the important element is that you're developing a master plan that you're trying to deliver in phases because this is for long-term growth. You actually want a bit of flexibility in your master plan to take into account that it's going to be delivered over a long time and that things may change. But what we were very clear in saying in our master plan document at paragraph 5.4.12 is that it was the intention of the airport to contain the development within the boundary where possible, which is a good principle of land use planning. And I think in just looking at Plan 20, in terms of the surface access arrangements, it makes complete sense to me as an airport planner to capture as much traffic as possible from the strategic road network. And so that's what the master plan is trying to do. You can see on the left-hand side of Plan 20, you've got the M23 motorway going in a north-south direction. And you can see at point 18, the motorway spur road, which comes off in an east-west direction. And you can see that that goes into the area of car parking. So it makes complete sense from a master planning conceptual point of view to capture the cars as soon as they've come off the motorway. You don't want them going any further than they have to. It's not efficient, and it's not really that sustainable either. So you want to capture the vehicle traffic once it's left the strategic motorway. And I think, it's not just Gatwick Airport that are saying that a lot of work went into its master plan. In our representation, which is Rep 056, 001B, which is our Appendix 2, we quote Howard Davies, who ran the Airports Commission process for the government between 2013 and 2015. So he spent 2 years examining Gatwick's master plan. And he concluded at the end of that process that Gatwick's scheme is plausible, financeable, and deliverable. And he recognised both the quality and, I think rather tongue-in-cheek, the quantity of the effort that went into that submission. Because, as I say, it was tens of millions of pounds that went into the preparation of that master plan. And I think it's fair to say that a master plan is not meant to be a detailed planning application. It's not worked up in that amount of detail. You would only work up that level of detail once you have decided to take forward the planning application. In this case, it would be for a development consent order. And at that stage, you would start the very detailed technical work in the overall, alignment of the master plan itself, which sets out the broad concept. So I think it's entirely reasonable to have this sort of master plan in place, which has been worked up in quite a lot of detail, but not the next stage level of detail that would be required for a planning application. And just so we're clear, I think it was mentioned yesterday that Gatwick has sort of identified all of this land and it's been blighted. In order to try and deal with the blight, we have had in place a number of blight schemes, which are also referenced in Section 5.5 of our master plan. We've had a property market support bond, and we've also had a homeowner support scheme in order to protect local residents from the potential blight that could be created. And those property support schemes were put in place, I believe, in 2016 and had a 5-year expiry, and they came up for renewal in 2021. And Gatwick Airport extended those schemes through to January 2030 in the anticipation that safeguarding would continue. So taken together, all of these elements make up the master plan. And I don't think it's right that you can just pick elements or jigsaw pieces out and put them to one side or lose them. That isn't the way that master planning is generally done. So I think, just sort of to end, I think simply our point is that any growth of Gatwick, any second runway growth, would need to be undertaken in conjunction and in liaison with acknowledging the existing boundary of the airport. You've got to have facilities and land that abuts the existing boundary of the airport. You've got to take into account the existing local access arrangements. And I think it is entirely logical, sensible and sustainable to have a master plan in the form that's presented in Plan 20. It connects efficiently with the existing airport. It connects efficiently with the existing road network. And we have tried to contain the land as far as possible in the existing boundary that was provided back in 2006. So a huge amount of work, sir, that goes into these plans. It's not just done, without a significant thought process going into it.
Of course. I'll keep the jigsaw in mind as well.
Yeah.
Could you remind us of the time frame for delivery of this master plan?
Well, I think we've always said that we would stand ready to take forward a second runway should the government decide to support it. I think we've said, or we're on record as saying, that we believe it could be delivered in about 10 years from the start of the planning application sort of preparation. To finish? Until operation, yeah. So the first phase, yeah. So that's going through a DCO process, getting consent, and then taking it into construction and into the first phase of operation. We think it would take probably in the region of about 10 years, I think we've said. And I think back in 2014 we costed the proposal, and in 2014 prices, I think it was coming out at about £7.5 billion.
And does the time frame include the delivery of the parking area on the Gatwick Green allocation? And would that grow organically, or was it a big bang delivery?
It would need to be phased according to growth, sir. Okay.
Would the council like to respond?
Yeah, thank you, sir. Yes, I mean, from the council's perspective, the council does not believe that the Gatwick Green allocation would hinder sustainable aviation growth or airport operations. This issue has been discussed and addressed in the council's written statement to question 5.24 under matter 5 in some detail. The council's view is that the Gatwick Green strategic employment allocation would not prejudice the delivery of the Northern Runway project, nor a potential future southern runway at Gatwick Airport. The local plan has retained the majority of the land safeguarded for the delivery of a southern runway, and the Gatwick Green allocation can come forward in a manner that operates complementary to and does not prejudice the southern runway project, including its car parking and all the highways infrastructure necessary to deliver the Northern Runway project and the southern runway. Just a couple of points really on the car parking. If you could bring the master plan up, please, that would be helpful. I think the first key point is that there's no complexity to the land shown to the east of the railway line. It's simply showing a large swathe of surface car parking. And what we have not seen from GAL is the evidence that the essential master plan elements can't be delivered.
Thank you. Is there any response from Gatwick before we move on?
I was just wondering, as I said, the master plan hangs together. All of the elements are essential. I'm not too sure what criteria the Borough Council used for deciding which elements are essential or not. Because, as I say, it's absolutely normal for all airports to have access arrangements and car parking close to the facilities. That's just a fundamental principle of airport master planning.
Thank you. Hello, Mr. Pereira.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to ask Mr. Mayor and Mr. Cross to come in a moment, but can I just make an observation? There's obviously a tension, I think probably more fairly called a contradiction, at the heart of what Mr. Norwood is saying. GAL are, of course, the most resourced party here. And it'll be on the recording, but I think Mr. Norwood said it would take several months, in parenthesis only, to work through the master planning implications of Gatwick Green. And yet nothing has been done, at least that they are willing to show publicly at this examination. So for all the years that Gatwick have known about this, and the several months of work that you're being told it would take to work through the implications of Gatwick Green, you have no single piece of paper or plan or report or master planning exercise to demonstrate what they say is their case, that the two developments are incompatible. And you may want to draw your own conclusions as to why. I want to say something about the jigsaw analogy. It may be a good analogy, but bear in mind, when we all make jigsaws, we work to the picture on the box. It's GAL who draws the picture on the box. And they can draw a different picture on the box, because master plans are living documents. And so it would be a mistake to think that the jigsaw has to look like the 2019 master plan. Of course it doesn't. So the question is, what's the picture on the box? And GAL have produced no evidence at all on that question, and it's quite startling and remarkable. I'll hand over now to Mr. Mayor and then to Mr. Cross.
Thank you, James. Thank you, sirs. Yeah, just wanted to again respond to a couple of the points that Mr. Norwood's made about the airport master planning process, as introduced by James. The Gatwick are right in saying that the master planning process is a time-consuming and an expensive exercise, and we can see from past history that they've been updating their master plans on roughly a 7-year cycle. 2005, 2012, 2019. Many airports will update their master plan either continuously or every 5 years. So that's completely understandable that they wouldn't seek to produce an entirely new master plan in a matter of months. That said, you're not limited to only carrying out master planning activities once every 7 years. That might be when the next major iteration of a master plan takes place, but airport planners carry out studies for airports all the time, and they don't have to be a full master plan every single time. So very often we will carry out small studies, and they might focus on a particular facility, they might focus on a small area of a master plan, they might focus on solving a particular problem, or even designing a particular facility that seeks to go forward to a planning application. In this case, I think it's fair to say, while the whole jigsaw puzzle has to fit together, the car parking itself is a big enough area and it's a big enough facility that it could be looked at in isolation. You could look at different parking arrangements that are possible within this piece of land without unravelling the location of the runway, the terminal, the surface access principles and everything else. So there's nothing that would have stopped them from looking at the car park in more detail to see how it could respond to Gatwick Green and work as a valid airport master plan that might be slightly different from the 2019 version, but equally legitimate. That could have been studied, but doesn't seem to have been done so. And the last point that I would like to make that just sort of adds to that is the master planning process itself, that costs a lot of money and takes a lot of time, will include all of the supporting analysis of how many car parking spaces are needed, as we discussed yesterday, but also it includes an optioneering process where you consider multiple possible options of how could we solve this particular puzzle, and then normally goes through an evaluation process to select a preferred option. So given that that would have been a part of the process in 2014 and 2019, no doubt Gatwick have considered various different master plan alternatives, which would have included perhaps different solutions to car parking. Now, only one solution, which we could assume was the preferred solution, has been presented in the public domain, in the published master plan, but the work that sits behind it hasn't been shared since, and that might include, for example, that option study. And I think we could probably conclude that the preferred master plan here that we're seeing, published into the public domain, is the one that's got the lowest cost of car parking and the largest possible footprint. So that's obviously supported the claim for needing that much safeguarding land. I think we could probably assume that all of the alternatives would have shown more intense parking alternatives, such as decking, robotics, multi-storey car parks that needed considerably less land. So we assume that the work would have been done, but it hasn't been shared since 2020 when this issue was first discussed. Thank you. If I could hand over to my colleague Tony Cross.
Thank you, Nick. And sirs, before I start, I'd just like to say that I've spent over 10 years advising my client on the transport and access strategy for Gatwick Green. During that time, I've also spent a great deal of it seeking to accommodate the proposals that Gatwick Airport put forward for their southern runway. In that time, we've also received the DCO submission, which are a different set of proposals, which we've also sought to accommodate. So I'm very familiar with framework plans. I'm very familiar with planning. I've been involved in major transport plans all around the country. I know how long they take. And I was involved many years ago with HS2. So long-term strategic infrastructure planning is something I'm very familiar with. I'd like to say before I carry on that the Southern Runway Access Strategy is a high-level concept plan. It is only that. And by putting some lines on a map doesn't cast it into stone or concrete or any other material for that matter. The plan requires significant amounts of third-party land and agreements to be in place, loss of residential units and road closures and road diversions. By contrast, our transport strategy requires 3 relatively modest accesses to existing road or from an existing road. We've sought throughout the process by which we've developed the access strategy for Gatwick Green to accommodate the very long-term plans and the very long-term strategy that's been presented to us back in 2019 by Gatwick Airport. I'm very happy, sir, if you think it would help, to take you through the Appendix 1 to our Statement of Common Ground with Crawley Borough Council, because I know sometimes these plans are not always as clear and as obvious as they might be. So if you would like, I don't want to waste your time or the time of the inquiry, but if you feel it would be helpful, I can just run you through the main elements of it, which represent our considerable effort in making sure we don't impede the development of Gatwick's long-term Southern Runway plans.
I think perhaps maybe we could save it for the transport discussion shortly.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. I'm pretty sure I understand the mechanics of master plans and effects or otherwise of delays. So is there any other Any other questions or points that people wish to raise? Oh, yes. I do have plenty of questions on parking robotics and alternative technologies and multi-decking and all sorts of things, but we'll save that for January. Do you want to respond on any of the parking points at all at this point that were raised?
I think we'll respond in our note to the York Aviation paper, which I think is due in the 15th of December, and then we'll save it for the hearings in January, please, sir.
Great, thank you. Anything from the council? Great, thank you. Okay, before we zoom down specifically to Gatwick Green, then I just want to retouch on some of the employment trends that were discussed yesterday. In terms of the B8, B2 struggle, I guess you could say, are there any trends that are apparent now that are happening and effects on Manor Royal in particular?
Yeah, thank you, sir. Yes, there are. We're seeing, I think what we've seen significantly is the demand at Manor Royal is overwhelmingly for the B8 typologies. I think what we have found, though, is that the constraints of Manor Royal are apparent. That's affecting the particular scale of warehousing that is coming forward. We know that Manor Royal is not able to meet the sort of the larger boxes. I think in the discussion yesterday we mentioned, but what we're seeing is the redevelopment of sites. Frequently that's been office stock, also some of the industrial buildings, and that is being lost and redeveloped in favour of the B8 warehousing. So that's certainly one of the trends we've seen. One of the concerns has been the loss of that defining mixed-use function of Manor Royal as a business district. What we wouldn't want to see is for that to be diluted. One of its strengths is that it has an office market, it has an industrial market, and it has a storage and distribution market. And I think certainly through the recent applications we've seen, we're starting to see we're starting to see that trend of that dilution of that mixed-use function. But we're also seeing that strong market demand for the B8 retail warehousing. Warehousing generally, sorry. But I think, again, what we're seeing in Manor Royal is a product of the sort of the very limited opportunities that are available there. The levels of the scale of the warehousing that's happening is, again, it's a product of the constraints within which Manor Royal is operating under.
And if you gave over to market forces and allowed it to continue indefinitely, or however much that Manor Royal could cope with, what would be the overall impact on the borough?
I suppose one thing is, again, what we've been discussing is having an economy that's robust, that's able to adapt, that is diversifying. I think the approach we have in Manor Royal is to allow for business-focused uses. So the policy does provide that flexibility. I think one of the issues you do see is it starts to evolve the way that Manor Royal is planned. There becomes practical issues as well, I think, possibly in terms of the implications of storage and distribution on a piecemeal basis rather than a planned comprehensive basis. And the other element, is I was going to say, is the job densities as well that you would get associated with storage and distribution. That's not to say that there's not a range of sort of skill sets within storage and distribution. There is, and I think our colleagues at the Gatwick Green promoters, they have provided information on some of the levels of skills, that it's not just logistics isn't just sort of a base level. There's actually development opportunities within that, so there is skills developments as well. But I think one of the key points is that density argument. I just think that, just very briefly as well, the other point that we have at Manor Royal is there's individual land ownerships. There's not a comprehensive landowner. So in terms of unlocking sites on a comprehensive basis, that is a very limited opportunity, which again is why we've seen sites coming forward at a certain scale, but not that strategic level. Again, through the Gatwick Green allocation, we do have that potential to look at things on a strategic level and unlock some of that larger warehousing that Manor Royal just simply isn't able to deliver.
Thank you. I'm interested in hearing more about the job densities, so perhaps if someone from Gatwick Green could guide us to the relevant part of your evidence.
Morning, sir. Mark Penny Savills, representing Gatwick Green. Obviously, you'll probably be aware that probably the most comprehensive guide on employment densities is the HCA Employment Density Guide from 2015. We've got a lot in our report in Chapter 6 that sort of deals with job density specifically. So logistics does have a lower job density than some of the other commercial uses. But one of the things I certainly implore you, sirs, to take into consideration is we all know a big part of what industrial logistics is their supply chains, wide-reaching, efficient, and we've got some analysis in there in figure 6.3 in our Rep 055 Appendix 2, which starts to quantify the wider supply chain employment. So basically what you get, and these are using government sort of multipliers from the ONS, for every 10 sort of on-site jobs you get in industrial logistics, you get another 7 to 12 jobs off-site. So you are, the off-site job impact is doubling the on-site job impact, and that should not be forgotten. That is very much what the economic profile of these uses are. You'll also see in that same sort of section in our report, and it's again a very important consideration, is this idea of indirect GVA. And the indirect GVA in industrial logistics is, threefold any other commercial uses. And what indirect GVA shows, without getting all economic-y on it, what it basically means is that you cannot sort of run this office building, you can't run a hospital, you can't run R&D, you can't really run any other commercial use without it being served as part of its supply chain by logistics premises. So I think we've got a lot in there. It's not just about on-site jobs. The economic profile of these uses go far beyond that. Indirect GVA and off-site jobs as part of supply chains are part of that mix.
Is the off-site jobs figure specific to B8 use, or is that generated through other B uses as well?
No, so these are specific. So I always initially speak in the term industrial and logistics. So that covers light industrial, manufacturing and logistics. Because the fact is, yes, while we've got use classes, most businesses will have grade lines across multiple of those operations. So, but the 7 to 12 off-site jobs is specific to industrial and logistics uses.
So would other B users have figures in that range?
They're much smaller. So an office use will have a much smaller supply chain reach than a logistics use.
Thank you.
So can I just add one point that might help you? The initial question was about the struggle between B8 and B2 and the trends and so on. It was a table that was referred to yesterday, but it might help you. It's EGA 3, so the January 23 update, table paragraph 2.28, table 2.7, which does show you the overwhelming preponderance of the B8 requirements in both modelling exercises. I think it's about 98% of the total is in B8.
Thank you. Are there any other? Yes, please.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Hunt for Gatwick Airport. Just picking up on the question about the pressure on Manor Royal. I mean, I think we have to be realistic about the extent to which that an allocation of Gatwick Green would ease that pressure. And if the council is concerned about the pressure and the change of use and the driving up at Manor Royal, then it's perfectly capable of protecting that through policy. And what we've seen in terms of what Savills has suggested, the nature of the level of demand and the regional nature of that demand for Gatwick Green, the extent to which an allocation of 13 hectares materially changes the market pressures versus the ability to do so through policy, I think needs to be given careful consideration. The council has the ability to set the policy for Manor Royal and to an extent resist those market forces if it wishes to do so.
So thank you. Just very quickly, just to endorse, if I may, Mr. Masson's description of the pressures on Manor Royal and indeed, of course, what we've seen elsewhere in the written submissions of Crawley's description of Manor Royal being the focus of mixed-use development and its local and sub-regional significance, as Mr. Osborne, on behalf of Ardmore, told us yesterday. So just to add to that, in this context, that of course extensions to Manor Royal would have acknowledged excellent accessibility and connectivity in a more sustainable location. And finally, so just to endorse the point on the higher job densities that come with mixed use industrial development compared to big box. Thank you.
And one more question for the council on that one before, and perhaps you could tie it in with your response. Has there been any changes in transport demand in Manor Royal?
I'm just going to be sort of saying this anecdotally, I think, but certainly in terms of discussions with DM colleagues and also with our advisors at Lichfields, each logistics site is obviously providing its own transport assessment as part of its application. But I think certainly having discussed this matter with our expert advisors at Lichfields as well, they have taken the view that what you're seeing again is this piecemeal coming forward of logistics potentially, where when a site becomes available within Manor Royal, it is redeveloped, and whilst it sort of washes its own face in terms of the transport, you are potentially seeing sort of cumulative impacts that may happen. So again, the point of obviously through the proposed allocation is we would be allocating on a comprehensive basis. So rather than logistics coming forward in a sort of an ad hoc way at Manor Royal, we would be planning sort of more comprehensively. Just to pick up on a couple of other points, just in terms of the sort of the council's ability to control or otherwise what comes forward at Manor Royal, we did some time ago consider looking to identify specific areas of Manor Royal for specific uses. I think the feedback we had from the market and the site owners was that would be overly prescriptive. It removed the flexibility that the market wanted, and again, it's not really achieving what the MPPF is in terms of economic flexibility and supporting business growth. So our approach is to try and meet that wider demand that's not being met is through an allocation that's dedicated and enables that to be tackled in a planned manner. Actually, I think that was my 1 point. Sorry, I've written 2 bullet points, but it was for 1, so apologies.
That's okay, thank you. Are there any other matters that anyone wants to discuss about point 3 on the agenda? Or would you like a break? Okay. Sorry, that sounded rather leading. Please do. Okay. We'll adjourn until 11:30. Thank you, everyone. Welcome back, everyone. We'll resume now. Okay, we're on question 4.22 in agenda item 4, which is the extent and shape of the allocation and whether it's justified. And that will lead into 23, which will ask about the exact sizing and the amounts put forward in the policy. The first question I have for well, the Council and Gatwick Green on a joint basis really is in terms of how the allocation came forward, and was it was the boundary of the allocation strictly based on land ownership?
Thank you, sir. The site came forward for a call for sites, so it was one of a number of sites promoted. As discussed yesterday, it's the only one that the council believes can come forward in a way that doesn't impact on safeguarding. So it was promoted that way. It is based on the land ownership of the site promoter. We're aware that it's a scheme that can come forward. They have no impediment to delivery of that scheme. So that's some of the key points on it. I think probably the other point to mention is that the site boundary of the allocation did change during the currency of local plan development. That was relating to the north-west corner of the site, where the site boundary was actually reduced slightly following discussions between Gatwick Airport and Gatwick Green Limited in relation to the transport access for the southern runway.
Thank you. Having read the essay options on alternative sites, and in particular the one that LRM is putting forward, there doesn't seem to be, well, they don't seem to be a million miles away in terms of benefits. There doesn't seem to be that much difference between Fernlands, I think it's called, and Gatwick Green site. And can you give some more insight into why that one was rejected, please?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the key reasons is we've been looking to identify a site that's capable of meeting the borough's objectively assessed employment needs. We believe we have. We obviously discussed the various different figures yesterday. So the council is planning on the basis of the 26.2 labour demand figure. So that's the one we've been planning on the basis for. The Gatwick Green site is capable of meeting that on a comprehensive basis, whilst allowing flexibility within that site for potential additional employment growth, be that required for market demand or as a result of a higher housing number, possibly should urban extensions come forward. So we've identified the site that's capable of meeting our needs with flexibility. On that basis, we haven't looked further, essentially trying to reduce the extent into safeguarding as far as possible whilst meeting our employment needs.
I'd like Gatwick Green to come in, and then I'll ask Mr. Rees if he's got any points he'd like to raise.
Thank you. So just to confirm what Mr. Masson has said, we promoted the site through the call for sites. It was at that stage a larger area, but subsequently the ownership of Gatwick Green Limited was limited to the area that's now been allocated by the council. So we then switched to promoting that as the area that we could deliver as a deliverable site. So that formed the basis of Gatwick Green, and the development framework plan that we have prepared and which is appended to our Reg 19 evidence and written statements, written statement on matter 4. That shows a framework of development parcels that can accommodate industrial and logistics buildings within a landscape and biodiverse setting. And it represents really the first stage in the development of a comprehensive master plan that's required under Strategic Policy C4. And it also shows a sustainable transport corridor, 2 vehicular access points from Balcombe Road. And this can all be delivered within the current shape and configuration of that site.
Thank you. Mr. Rees.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, Michael Rees on behalf of WT Land Properties and a number of the landowners in that what we've always termed the missing gap in that allocation. It goes without saying that we're supportive of the identification of a strategic site in this location. However, we do take issue with the size and the site of the site, which we believe needs to be increased. I think we went through yesterday a number of quite high-level points on the scale and quantum needed. I think where there's a general consensus that seemed to be emerging amongst the majority of respondents that the evidence was pointing in the direction of an increased requirement, and we put in our evidence was on the basis that should be in the order of a minimum of 50 hectares of employment land. After that, the circa 12 commitments are removed, so that would be in the order of 62 in total. Otherwise, we'll be in the same position in 5 years' time, where our successors will be looking to deal with the unmet need that we haven't addressed. There's a few points that we would make in terms of our site. We don't see that we would be strictly limited to big sheds. We recognise the need for smaller and more interim units, which is something that was raised yesterday. So we believe that there is a bit of flexibility that would be provided. That range and choice to provide for smaller units if needed. It also follows that, based on the discussions that were had and the council's view that Gatwick Green wouldn't have any impact upon safeguarding, it follows that we believe the same would apply to us, that in reality we become a kind of a 9 hectare leftover piece of land that serves no real purpose to anyone, when in reality it could be contributing towards the proper and comprehensive master planning of that general area. As I said, we've always kind of thought of ourselves as the whole in that master plan, in that allocation. And just to touch upon some of Crawley's responses to the promotion of the site, our clients, and we first became aware of the council's intentions for this part. So I don't think it was just land to the east of Balcombe Road. It was all of the safeguarded area. In the January 2020 version of the plan that went on consultation, I think it was all identified as to be dealt with through an area action plan, which then went into which then evolved into the allocation. And so as far as we're concerned, our clients have made the land available to the council since around that sort of time, so coming up to 4 years. So as far as we're concerned, it's eminently available. Technical work that has been done on the site proves that it's deliverable, and our clients would have no problem in terms of a working arrangement to deal with the site and its neighbouring allocation in a comprehensive manner. We do note that the council would prefer an allocation in a single ownership, but there are many circumstances where it's fair to say that there's a huge number of strategic allocations that come forward in multi-ownerships that only come forward through working arrangements with landowners. The most recent responses were that it was not needed, so that 8.8 hectares were not needed to meet employment needs. However, following the discussions yesterday, it's become increasingly apparent that that's not the case. All of that evidence, what's happening in Manor Royal, the significant weight of what several respondents are saying is that there should be that increase. So as such, we do feel it's important to extend the allocation to include our clients' 8.8 hectares. And not only to meet the scale and need as we went through yesterday, but to allow for the comprehensive master planning of the area. I think on that note, in the first instance, it is of course in line with what MPPF tells us about strategic sites, and looking Para 22 a minimum of 15 years for strategic policies. And Section 12 talks about all of the good planning, the good design principles that we should be looking to adopt, creating better places to live, and the design principles. And I won't go into those in detail. What I do think is that by looking at the allocation as a whole, it does allow for a more comprehensive approach to master planning of this strategic allocation. Within the Gatwick Green Limited Huron statements, there's a couple of plans that I think it is worth. I don't know whether you have access to at the moment, but in the Huron statement for, do you want the document, the reference number? Okay, so Appendix 3. So Appendix 3 shows the current development parcels that are identified at in the boundaries as it currently stands. I think there's a number of things from a master planning point of view that stand out on that. In the first instance, it has moved on quite a lot from the early versions of the plan of the master plan that were produced, that had lots of green corridors, that it had a strategic transport route running through the site, it had a transport interchange, and various other components. What this arrangement does, in the first instance, we have my client's land is coloured in as a biodiversity enhancement area, which kind of leads me to think that it may not in itself be capable of addressing requirements such as biodiversity net gain, and to have a comprehensive master plan, then that would help with that. But similarly, in terms of surface water attenuation, I mean, we know for our site, based on roughly 5 hectares of net development area, that there's a fairly large requirement for surface water attenuation. None is shown on the current plan. What we also have are a number of irregular and small-scale leftover blocks next to dwellings, etc. That when you look at everything in the round and as a whole, then it certainly makes better sense to deal with it as a comprehensive, for a single master planning approach that looks to looks to that 15-year time frame and looks to achieve the best outcome for the area. So based on that, and really to sum up, we do believe that in order to meet the scale and need that we went through yesterday, and ensure flexibility to provide a range and choice of sizes of units, to provide a comprehensive master planning approach, a site that can come forward with no adverse impacts on safeguarding. Our clients would be committed to working with the council and Gatwick Green Limited in order to help deliver a more comprehensive approach.
Thank you. I saw your up in it, but it's back down. Did you wish to? Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Look, we obviously at one time early in the process we had this area included, so you know we understand its suitability. Obviously, it wasn't in my client's gift, and our client pursued the allocation of its land at that time under those circumstances. The development framework plan we put forward, it shows an area of green across the land Mr. Rees has been referring to. It is simply and only identifying an area of priority habitat inventory, deciduous woodland. That's all it does, is just reflect an environmental consideration that exists already and is already designated. Excuse me. I mean, safe to say, in the round, the council's evidence base is predicated on the 44 hectare Gatwick Green Limited land. The access arrangements that we've indicated on development framework plan and the sustainable transport corridor, none of those would preclude this land being looked at some appropriate stage in the future. But it's not something that we have been looking at this stage, and nor is the council, for the reasons they've said. So I think that's all I want to add to those points.
In terms of the development framework plan that Mr. Rees pointed us to, how does allocating the land for a priority habitat inventory fit with your overall plans and bringing Fernlands into the master plan?
Well, that area of priority habitat inventory sits outside of the Gatwick Green Limited master planned area. It is an area that, you know, obviously has got some ecological values. We would be looking to sort of treat the interface, if you like, between our scheme and that area with care and attention. We've had a range of consultants look at all the aspects of the scheme and all the relevant setbacks for amenity purposes, for heritage purposes. There's a number of listed buildings dotted in that area, and also for noise. So all those buffers have been identified, and that plan sort of, in a way, that plan reflects that work and the advice we've had from those technical consultants. And that's all set out in our Regulation 19 representations. In terms of surface water attenuation, Mr. Rees is right. This is quite a low-lying area, subject to some areas of surface water flooding. There will need to be a technical solution to that, and our engineering consultants, Clark Bond, have advised that can be achieved within the design of the site through storage arrangements. It doesn't require surface water attenuation in the form of balancing ponds, and that's an obvious issue for potential conflict with the requirements of Gatwick Airport and bird strike issues. So all those matters are set out in those technical documents, and really there are no impediments to the site coming forward.
Okay, I see I see the land as important as it's put on the master plan, but how would that be delivered if Fernlands isn't part of the master plan delivery process?
So the area of priority habitat inventory is existing, and it's on adjoining land, not within Gatwick Green. So our clear objective is to ensure that whatever we develop for the site wouldn't cause any disturbance to any ecological values within that area. How it's dealt with in the future through any potential further development in that area is a completely separate matter for further consideration if in the event that it came forward through a local plan.
Thanks very much. Question from the council, and coming back on any points that you wish to from that discussion. Picking up on a point that Mr. Rees made, does I'm not sure it does, but you can remind me whether the SA makes any if the site's left out of the master plan, did the council look at the sort of negative factors in that process?
Thank you. Yes, we did pick up the sites that have not been carried forward. Is that what you were referring to in particular?
Yes, it was a point that Mr. Rees made about the fact that if the site was left out, then it would be surrounded by this land, and the effects that would. That was right, wasn't that? I'm sorry, I'm paraphrasing you.
Yeah, effectively.
Being the hole in the donut, I guess.
Yeah. I think the essay does pick up that there is potentially a sort of a more logical site layout that could come forward. But again, I think it goes back to the points that we have made about trying to sort of identify a single allocation to meet our needs. So we haven't been looking beyond that figure. So that's the rationale. But yes, the essay did pick up that there may be sort of greater logic potentially in other layouts or additions. But yeah.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Sargent, thanks.
Thank you, sir. I mean, as you all have understood from our hearing statement, Gatwick Airport's position is that the allocation is too large. It's 44 hectares against the council's identified need of 13, which is on any view an enormous amount of headroom. But I'm not going to go back over the evidence you heard yesterday from everybody about the amount of land that's needed. And our case, as you've also understood, is that we have justified a position whereby there's no release from the safeguarded land. But on the sort of shape and size of Gatwick Green's allocation point, my submissions are these, which is that if the view were taken that some land should come out of the safeguarding and be released for an employment allocation, then it would be sufficient to take the northern section of Gatwick Green, or indeed, alternatively, one could take the northern section of Gatwick Green and Fernlands, which would give a more logical and a neater footprint. Or alternatively, one could look into bringing forward only the southern part of Gatwick Green. But the short point is that 44 hectares isn't needed, and more thought should have been given to a smaller allocation, and certainly to, a more logical, as the council have just acknowledged, a more logical disposition of the allocation, because the benefit of that approach would have been that the impact on Gatwick's forward planning would have been less. But I think Mr. Norwood also has some commentary on the kind of shape and size of the allocation, so if I can just ask for him to provide that input as well, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, yes. I think just in terms of the site layout, I think if you were going to be doing a master planning exercise, that's not the type of arrangement that you would probably put forward. I take the point, and this is all based on a pure land ownership. But what we're talking about here is a strategic employment site, I think, for the next during the plan period out to 2040. And effectively what you're left with from a Gatwick Airport perspective is some land right on the sort of edge next to the motorway network, which is quite remote from the operation of the airport. So the size and the shape of the site wouldn't, have any relationship at all with the existing airport today. It would be a strange shape to then try and integrate that into the future airport operation. So I think leaving slithers of land isn't an efficient use of land, and it's not really a sustainable use of land as well.
Thank you. Mr. Rees, you just put your sign down. Did you want to come in here?
I can do. I was just going to go back to the framework plan. I'm happy to if it would be helpful, but I just wanted to iterate really that a lot of that, what is the biodiversity enhancement, the deciduous woodland, it's not a woodland, it's in quite poor state, and it's a row of trees. But of course, by master planning comprehensively, in our approach, we'd had that as something of an ecological corridor. So it goes to show the links that can be made if you're dealing with the site as a whole. There is just one other point on there, which is our clients' northernmost fields are shown as a biodiversity opportunity area, which is different to the deciduous woodland. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Mr. Powney.
Thank you, sir. I wasn't going to come in because I got enough airtime yesterday, which I was thankful for. But I just think there was just a comment that alarmed me and my ears pricked up about the lack of need. I mean, sirs, I really want to leave you with the point of view that I'll come in a different way. Industrial logistics is the strongest commercial sector in the UK. It hasn't just been that through COVID. It's been that since the end of the global financial crisis. So you're seeing the Savills evidence, using government statistics. This sector in the last 10 years has grown by, the jobs in industrial logistics has grown by 30%. Double the economy of a whole at 15%. You'll see in our evidence the pay in this sector is higher than the national average, and in the southeast it's around £5,000 per annum higher than the average salary levels. So you've got high job growth, better quality jobs. You also have evidence in mine at figure 6.7 that the jobs are becoming increasingly skilled as the sector changes. It's one of the most productive. What you have, and there is also a reference, and rather than making you go to it now, but in your later reading, there's a figure 2 in our rep 008-001, which clearly shows the regional significance of the Gatwick Green allocation, directly adjacent to a junction on one of the most important movement corridors in this country, linking the largest residential and business conurbation in this country, being London, to the south coast. So that's the context, and a little bit wider than what I was talking about yesterday. So I just have to leave you the actual demand, and I don't want to go over what I went yesterday, that the council have taken their approach and put forward the 26.2 as a minimum based on a consistent trend with historic levels, which we all know historically, and we all absolutely agree with the council that there's not been enough supply in this prime location historically. So all I just want to leave you with the assumption again, market demand, because it will be, it's market investment that creates these jobs and all these high paid jobs which are evidenced. It's the market demand, and I want to leave you in no uncertain view that the market demand is substantial. And whether it's Savills at 69 hectares, it's W.T. Lamb at 62 hectares, it's Lichfield's revised note at 48.7 hectares, or it's using the 26.2 minimum, adding on the 32 hectares of unmet demand in the current plan, and we're only halfway through the current plan period. If you add the 26.2 Experian modelling with the 32 hectares of unmet need in the current plan, you're at 55 hectares. So the consensus from several different viewpoints, you are in, as you rightly contextualised yesterday, sirs, in the 50 to 70 hectare range. So do not be uncertain that Gatwick Green is as attractive as you'll get to the market in this region, in the strongest commercial sector in the country. So sorry if I've repeated from yesterday.
No, it's all helpful in getting the point home. Mr. Cross and then Ms. LePage.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Fife. That's all right. We're always confused, but yeah, just a couple of points to come back. Mr. Powney has very, very eloquently explained again the quantum of need and demand, and how that aligns with Gatwick Green in terms of its scale and its importance to the economy. In terms of the other issues that are being raised by Gatwick Airport Limited, we've taken a comprehensive view to this site in terms of master planning, and that comprehensive approach is important. It can deliver, apart from the on-site sustainable transport corridor, which is really critical because anyone arriving at this site, they need that certainty that they can get to their place of work without having to compete with heavy goods vehicles and all that sort of thing. If you don't have that on-site sustainable transport infrastructure, it's not a sustainable site in that sense. It also delivers, will help to deliver a number of critical elements of walking and cycling infrastructure throughout Crawley, and those things are set out in the infrastructure schedule. So it's important as a comprehensive approach. Yes, the site can be phased, and that's going to be probably logical in terms of what the market requirements are. But I would essentially it needs to come forward as a whole, and there needs to be certainty through the policy framework that the whole is going to be allocated, and then we can deal with it comprehensively in the way we've proposed in that development framework plan.
Thank you. Ms. LePage.
Hi, yes, thank you. Just responding particularly to Gatwick's position and to Mr. Rees. I think the Council consider that the allocated site is sound, deliverable and sufficient to meet the needs that have been identified with some flexibility. Changes could reduce the allocation size, so reducing that flexibility, and may also complicate deliverability. However, if you felt it necessary for the soundness of the plan to consider a modification on the layout and the allocation, we would consider that, providing it left us with willing landowners able to deliver a site of appropriate scale, comprehensively and with a comprehensive combined master plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Just on that point, and I wasn't going to ask this, but I think it might be useful. What's the size of the northern portion and the size of the southern portion, please?
Yes, so the northern parcel. So we have these figures, but they weren't immediately to hand.
That's okay.
The northern parcel is 13.07 hectares.
Sorry, 30?
13.07 hectares, yep. And the southern portion is 15.05 hectares. And the demarcation between the two, which Mr. Forsdick asked me to clarify, is Fernhill Road. Yeah. Oh, I beg your pardon.
Thank you.
28.
A question for the council, please, on the 13.73 figure expressed in the policy. Given that there's a master plan for the site and that what we've heard on need, etc., would having that figure expressed as a minimum result in any confusion or unsureness about what was to come?
I tried to answer this yesterday because I think it was raised yesterday as to whether a minimum means basically almost a ceiling, and that's clear. That absolutely wasn't the intent. It absolutely wasn't meant to be a ceiling or to be read as a ceiling. If the words could be clearer, that it's the flexibility right up to the 44 hectares or the 30 hectares or whatever, then so be it. But that our intent was to allocate 13 plus, and if the wording doesn't quite do that, then fine.
I was just wondering if it would be more appropriate to reflect the actual need based on any outcome of our considerations.
At the moment, we say the need is 13 as a minimum, and if you find differently, then of course the figures would need to change to meet what you say.
Thank you. Mr. Fife.
Sorry, apologies, sir. The figures I gave, we were looking there at net developable, which comes out. That's why it comes out to around about the 30 that we put in our evidence. So the split is about 22 hectares north, 22 hectares south. And my apologies for that.
That's useful because that adds up to the 44 hectares I have in front of me. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Sorry, you're going to hear from me again. We'll come back to you in a moment, Mr. Rees. In terms of obviously the policy is expressed as a minimum of 13.73 hectares, but from one reading of the plan, it clearly allocates more land. Would it be more effective or justified that the policy is clear that it allocates 44 hectares rather than a minimum, and that's arguably flexibility or a buffer against the minimum requirements? I'll give the council an opportunity to explain why it considers its submitted plan to be sound in that respect, and whether that modification would cause, or potential modification would cause, any issue.
EC4 is meant to be allocating the 44 hectares. But the release of that allocation is meant to be governed by the 13 plus approach. And so anything above 13 would have to be justified by reference to market signals or need as set out. So it absolutely is meant to be understood to be a 44 hectare allocation. If it doesn't read like that, it read like that to us because we've got the plan next to us and we know what it is. If it doesn't read like that, then that's what it was meant to. Right.
So, Mr. Rollins, so just in terms of the operation of the policy, even though the site is allocated in the plan, or would be allocated in the plan, if a proposal comes in once 13.73 hectares has been built out, then that proposal has got to go through the additional hoops of demonstrating the need to be on an allocated site. Is that how the council is intending the policy to operate?
The timing of the need, I think, the phasing of the need. and when it comes forward. I'm not the word. I get exactly what you're saying from the words, but it's not meant to say, oh well, you've got to come back and demonstrate that there's that the allocation is justified, because the allocation is for the 44, and it might be better worded by reference to the timing or the phasing of the delivery is justified. I'm getting nods from those around me, so that is what it was meant to do.
Thank you. Are there any more comments on this point before we move on to transport? Yes, please.
Our point, and it's made clearly in our representation, is that the need is for significantly more than 13.73 hectares. And when you've got clear evidence of need, which is not just our evidence, but Litchfields have come up with evidence, the Council's topic paper 5 contained evidence in that respect. When you have that evidence of need, the normal approach would be to allocate a site, in this case 44 hectares, to meet the need. So the need is identified in Strategic Policy EC1, and then Strategic Policy EC4 then allocates the site to meet that need, and then any requirements for landscaping, buffers and setbacks and so on and so forth, that's all provided for in EC4, so you then get down to a net developable area. But the critical thing, and in terms of providing clarity and certainty for both the promoter and in terms of the market and in terms of how the policy is applied, it now makes sense to us, given the evidence that's before this examination, to allocate the site in full through EC4 and dispense with the minimum requirement, because I don't think it serves any purpose now. The evidence is there.
Thank you. I've got a further question for the Council on this matter, actually, and Mr. Rees, I see your sign up as well. Perhaps I'll come to you first, Mr. Rees, and then I'll return to the Council.
Yeah, I was only going to just clarify that just in terms of that northern parcel, in addition to the Gatwick Green area, there would be an additional 8.8 hectares, which is our clients' land holdings. Thank you.
Great, thank you. If the northern or the southern portion was to be the sole deliverable or sole allocated part, presumably that would still meet the minimum need that you've expressed. Would there be any other barriers that you saw in terms of the overall aspirations for the Council and the employment delivery?
Are you asking as a standard just?
No, just Fernlands and Gatwick Green for the north, or just the south for Gatwick Green?
I think from the Council's point of view, we'd be accommodating our employment needs, which is what we're looking to do through the plan, and which we consider to be a sound approach based on the allocation as proposed. I think were there to be a scenario where it's the northern parcel of Gatwick Green plus Fernlands, I suppose the only thing is you lose that flexibility buffer almost to a degree. The bigger site has greater flexibility, but at the same time, we appreciate you've got a number of factors to balance in your decision. Excuse me. Sorry, my throat's gone. And there would still be an uplift. Just doing the maths there. Sorry. Inopportune moment that. Yeah, so we'd have we'd be looking at the 22 hectares plus the 8.8. So that would still be, obviously it's going to come down to the deliverable area, but there would appear to be an uplift on our labour demand figures. So there would still be an element of flexibility there.
Mr. Powney.
Thank you, sir. I just want to come in, if you were to splice this site into a smaller site, you are very much curtailing the ability of dealing with the lack of large unit supply in Crawley. So that is very clear also in our evidence, that It's just going back to that point in our evidence, there is zero availability in large units over 250,000 square foot or 25,000 square metres. So if you were to bring this into a smaller allocation, this, you know, that large unit demand has been driving the market nationally. Crawley has not been able to participate in it because its main employment allocation, Manor Royal, is smaller parcels built out and really dealing with sort of churn and, you know, kind of upscaling of the quality of premises. So if you were to, you know, half Gatwick Green, for want of a better word, you are then taking away what is a strategic allocation, making it non-strategic and making it too small to then meaningfully deal with the zero availability for large units. And I want to sort of take you back, it was not in our evidence, but there is numerous employment studies up and down the country, and I can reel some of them off to you, sir, if they're useful, but it's become very common that the minimum size for a strategic site is around 25 hectares, and a lot of these reports, in reality, most of them are around 50 hectares plus. So what you would be doing from cutting Gatwick Green is removing a strategic allocation and replacing it with effectively what's a fairly small site.
Thank you. Mr. Fife.
Thank you. Just following on from Mr. Powney's comments and really just almost reiterating what I've said before, is that, you know, the scale of this site is really important. It's important in terms of delivering infrastructure. And, you know, though you can't divorce that scale from the importance of the infrastructure. The transport strategy or study, the Council's transport study, is based on delivering at scale. And if you start to sort of play with the size of the site, you will lose some of the benefits. You may still have a site that's deliverable, but you won't be delivering some of the benefits that we can offer, particularly in terms of off-site active mode transport infrastructure.
Thank you. Sorry, I can't see your name there. Sorry, I know you're from the County Council. Mr. Lovely. Oh, Mr. Cross. Sorry, I didn't see yours up. We'll have you, and then we'll have the County Council. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. I just thought to add to my colleagues' comments that the transport study tested 77,500 square metres, and that transport study produces, therefore, a budget of trips which can be used variously according to the land use and the kind of development that comes forward from the market. The key point is that we know from the study that that level of development can work. It accords with, clearly it accords with a size of site much greater than 13 point, whatever it is, sorry, I've forgotten it, 13.73, sir. So we know we can deliver that site. We know we can deliver it in transport, in terms of transport. But it's not just transport, there's other aspects of that. And particularly, of course, the sustainable transport measures which go with a site of that size. So the scale is important, but it has been tested and it can be delivered.
Right. I was also going to address the point of what the transport study, as it's been mentioned, has tested. As Mr. Cross has confirmed, it does test a floor area GFA of 77,500, and at the time the transport study was produced, that was intended to reflect an allocation of 24.1 hectares. So the transport evidence is there up to that level of floor area on the proposed split of uses, which is assessed, which is 60% B8 commercial warehousing, 10% B8 parcels distribution, and 30% industrial estate. Development above that scale would require further transport evidence.
Ms Sargent.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I think it was Gatwick Green yesterday who were at pains to make the point that GAL is a private entity. Well, I did mean to say at the time, and I managed to refrain from doing so, but obviously Gatwick Green is as well. It seems to me, to be honest, that the scale of this application largely is a reflection of Gatwick Green's land ownership. Where we are, having heard the evidence this morning, is that the land in the northern parcel of Gatwick Green, together with Fernlands, would give you 30 hectares, which on Mr Powney's own evidence for Gatwick Green is a strategic level allocation because it's 25 hectares or above. And the council's representatives' evidence was that that approach would, or indeed allocating just the south of Gatwick Green, would meet the identified needs, the needs that the council have identified, and would do so allowing capacity for an uplift as well. So having heard what everyone's had to say this morning, it remains our position that the 44 hectares is clearly not justified.
Thank you. Mr Williams.
Yes, thank you, sir. I just wanted to pick up really on my colleague Tony Cross's points and Guy Parfitt's point as well. In terms of the 77,500 square metres, that does set a trip budget, as they mentioned, but it doesn't necessarily set a floor space budget or a site area limit, because there's obviously variations within the land use mix that you have. So while the model has tested a certain land use mix with a percentage of parcel distribution and B8 and B2, there's obviously different ways that that site could come forwards. It could be much more B8, for example, which then takes up a much larger footprint as it has a much lower trip rate associated with it. And that's obviously evidenced in the Crawley model study. So we're obviously confident that the 77,500 square metres can be delivered within the modelling, but that doesn't necessarily set the floor area at that level. It could be larger depending on the market needs and the type of unit delivered.
Thank you. Mr Keane.
So a very quick point, just to remind you, as I know you've already read, that Jersey Farm compendiously is 17.2 hectares, very similar size area at Hydehurst Lane, but both of which obviously adjoin the existing main employment area at Manor Royal.
Excuse me while I grab a new pen. Anyone else would the council like to complete our discussion on this before we move on to transport?
We have no further comments.
Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for your contributions so far. I'd like to return to a plan that's already been referenced, and that's the one in Appendix 3 of Gatwick Green's statement, which shows the master plan, and cross-referenced that with the plan at the back of the statement of common ground between Gatwick Green and the council, which shows some, excuse my language, fairly hardcore transport interventions in blue. And given what we know about deliverability timeframes of both the airport master plan and the intended delivery of Gatwick Green, wondering whether the suggested interim road layout, which is mostly limited to on-site interventions, well, at least in the case of showing what the master plan will build, will be suitable for the surrounding road network until those large-scale interventions come forward.
Thank you, sir. I'm assuming you'd like me to comment on that.
Yes, please. Yeah, I should have directed that to someone, really, shouldn't I? Talking to the room.
No, I got the hint. would it be helpful, sir, if I took you through that plan? Because I think it's always much clearer when the person that's drawn it effectively describes what it means in reality. Just to repeat what I said earlier, and I'll do so very briefly, that we have, I suppose to some extent, taken absolutely full account of the concept plans submitted by GAL, and this is exactly what we end up with as a consequence of doing that. I'll take it in two parts, if I may, sir. That is, describe to you what's in front of you in relation to the southern runway proposals with the delivery of Gatwick Green. And then I will pass on and just briefly mention the situation with the DCO, which of course has come along since this plan, at least the infrastructure plan associated with the southern runway, was proposed. So just to re-reference it, I'd like to draw your attention to paragraph 8.7 of the Statement of Common Ground. I can reference that document, sir. That's the Statement of Common Ground between ourselves and Crawley Borough Council. And that reference is PS/CBC/SOCG/17. You have that plan. So I'll just start off by saying that long stay parking has a very modest turn-up rate for the vehicles seeking to park on it. And the second point I'd make is that those vehicles don't need to enter the car park at high speed, and nor do they necessarily need to enter it immediately from the SRN. So I think the plan again attempts to accommodate what GAL is suggesting, but doesn't necessarily, and it does so only on the assumption that that is what they're suggesting. It isn't necessarily the best engineering solution. So in summary, the blue lines on that plan are the infrastructure proposed and some parts of the existing M23 motorway. The black lines and the black dots, or rather the black dots and black arrows, are proposed accesses for Gatwick Green itself. The red lines are our idea, and it is only an idea, of how the retained safeguarded land could be accessed from the main highways. And the curious purple and green line around the eastern edge of the plan is the diverted Balcombe Road. And that diversion hugs the western side of the M23, and then alongside the northern M23 spur to the south of that spur. What we have done, and I think this is again very clearly demonstrates just how hard we've sought to work with the proposed plans, is to propose that our northern access would form the first part of the diverted Balcombe Road, were that to come forward, so that it would be feasible for a single route along that northern axis rather than two separate routes, which would happen if we built our own route and then separately Gatwick came along and delivered the diverted Balcombe Road. I'll pause there. The only other point I wanted to make in relation to the southern runway proposals is that the darker green lines to the south of the plan are the accesses we would propose to maintain should Gatwick Green come forward before and indeed and alongside the proposed southern runway. And they utilise an existing road called Antlants Road and a short piece of road known currently as Balcombe Road. So the old, as it is in this plan, the old Balcombe Road. The only other point I'd make, sir, is that so as not to provide any impedance at all to the plans of Gatwick to access its car parks as shown, we have not connected our site in any way to their their proposed new roads, the M23 diversion, the A23 diversion, to the west of the site. So where the red line, with 2 hours on either end, an hour on either end, joins their proposed new infrastructure, we have not sought to join that. It would, of course, make every sense, and from a transport planner's point of view, I was almost reduced to tears, actually, having to separate it out in this way. But I thought it would be sensible to show that we can access our site, they can access their car parking without any interference between the two. But it doesn't make sense, and clearly if they were to work with us, as we would hope, as we do still hope they will, that access could serve both our own site and, of course, theirs. And similarly, of course, with the diverted Balcombe Road to the northwest of our access there, that if we were to work together, that single northern road running along the southern axis of the M23 spur would work well for both of us. If I could then bring you to the DCO proposals, sir, we've had clearly a lot more detail as a neighbour of the airport. We've had a lot of detail on the DCO proposals and responded to them. At no time during the discussions on the DCO have the airport raised any concerns with us about the way in which our infrastructure would impede them, either in this or future developments. And the DCO can, and we have not raised an objection to the DCO in any way impeding our access in that northern corner. And indeed, actually, we wouldn't have any impact on their proposals to deliver the DCO. So we can sit together quite happily, sir, on the DCO proposals. We can sit together quite happily on the southern runway, and we cannot understand in any conceptual or actual real terms why these car parks, or if that's where they wish to put them, why those car parks can't be accessed both from existing roads and any new ones they wish to build themselves. So I'm happy to take any questions on the plan if you have any.
Thank you. I'll come back to you on that. Before I come back to the County Council, I've got a quick question for Gatwick, and that's whether the blue lines that we see on the plan, which represent the spur road and I think the realigned A23, are they proposed to be delivered as part of the DCO? Or what comes out of the DCO? There must.
No, they're not.
County Council, please.
In the context of discussing how the Gatwick Green site is accessed under different infrastructure scenarios, I thought I'd just clarify how it's been assessed through the strategic transport study, which is on the basis of the airport having a single runway, Balcombe Road on its existing alignment, 2 points of access for the Gatwick Green site, sort of at the north and south of the site, onto Balcombe Road, and the committed highway improvements from the Forge Woods development being in place, which includes junctions with Antlands Lane, Radford Road, the link road between Balcombe Road and the A2011, I think, Crawley Avenue, and the minor improvement scheme for Forge Woods at M23 junction 10. So that was the highway network assumptions which we used for testing.
Just so I'm clear, is that the link road that will be delivered in 2025?
Yes, okay. Yes, that's correct.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if I interrupted you or or cut you off prematurely there.
No, that's the committed infrastructure that was that's in place that the site was assessed against, and as a result of the assessment of the whole local plan, including the Gatwick Green site, scenario 2. Mitigation strategy was put in place, which is also necessary to deliver, and that does include further highway improvements on the SRN.
Okay, I've got that the link road also is dependent on M23 works in 2024. Are both of those funded?
Yes, that's all funded and being delivered by the Forgewood development. I believe the M23 junction 10 has already been the tenders have at least been out, so it's in progress towards delivery. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Cross.
So I just thought I'd reference to you the statement of common ground between ourselves and Crawley again. Item 7.4 deals with this matter as a matter of agreement between ourselves and Crawley, and does identify both the A211 and the junction 10 of the M23 schemes.
Thank you. Is there any response from the council on any of those points?
There's no further response on that.
Thank you. Okay, is the council or the county council the provider of bus planning?
We are the provider. Basically, we manage manage. We work alongside the bus providers who are Metrobus in Crawley. And what we basically do sometimes with them is agreements on some of the routes.
Thank you. Are you satisfied that the interim layout is conducive to sustainable transport options?
At the moment, yes, sir. I would say there's about 3 or 4 services that are running between Crawley and Hawley. At the moment, they're not running along Balcon Road itself, but is something that could be implemented as soon as the development, Gatwick Green comes forward.
Great, thanks very much. We'll move on. Sorry, Mr. Cross.
Thank you, sir. Just for information, many years ago I was head of transport at West Sussex County Council, and as a consequence was very heavily involved in the formulation of the Fastway bus service, which runs extensively around Crawley. I'm very pleased to hear that, sir. I've been working with the bus company ever since to, and I really mean ever since, to ensure that the site at Gatwick Green can be well served by the kind of services that attract people to use them. And I speak from experience in this, and I am currently working with the commercial director at Metrobus to ensure that as the site comes forward, then the bus services come forward with it. Whether they're existing or improved services, the site will be served. And that is part of the reason why we have what we're referring to as a sustainable transport corridor, running from north to south and south to north through the site. That corridor is bus, cycle and pedestrian only. It does not include general traffic, and it can clearly include Fastway buses. So that was built into the site from the outset. My client understood the purpose of it and understood the reasons for it. So we're closely involved with the bus operator and indeed been involved in their move towards the provision of hydrogen buses, a very exciting development for Crawley.
Thank you. A question for the Council. We're wondering whether the approach of the policy to require transport and mobility assessments at the application stage is sound. There's obviously some high-level work that's been done to date, but given that it's a single land ownership allocation, is it too late at that point? That could it affect the overall deliverability of the employment land if something horrible pops up in the transport assessment, for example?
I think the site's been tested at the level for the allocation for the local plan. County Council have confirmed that they're comfortable with the results of the transport study and the mitigation that's proposed within it. And then the policy is obviously looking at the details of how that works through at a planning application stage.
So those references are really based around what you would normally expect with a development application. Thank you. I'm not very good at looking left. I'm very sorry to everyone on that side of the table I've missed. It's no bias intended.
No problem. Thank you, sir.
It's the glasses, sorry. Yeah, Mr. Ellis.
Yeah, it was a comment in relation to some of the points which have been raised around the transport assessment and evidence base within the transport study to date. I just want to raise a few comments on that really, and particularly from Gatwick's perspective around the robustness of the evidence base. This was detailed within Annex 3 of GAL's response to Reg 19 consultation in 21 and included within the recent representations. It was called our review of transport modelling, but it has some relevance to some of the things which have been described today really, which is that the strategic policy identifies the site of the proposals as predominantly for B8 storage and distribution. And we've also heard a lot today about substantial demand for logistics and the importance of connections to the road network. We've also heard about the difference between a 13.73 hectare minimum and a possible allocation for 44 hectares, which feeds into the same discussion. We heard from Guy on the fact that the model used the assessment used a 21 hectare area to then calculate a floor space, which was what was actually used to generate the trips within the modelling. So there's a lot of variance and a lot of room for manoeuvre between these particular items. Within the Crawley transport study, and Guy picked this up again today, it's shown that the study trip rates, so the rates they use to calculate the number of vehicle trips, is very sensitive to the actual use. Guy described the difference between the different categories that are used in terms of that trip generation of B2 being 30% of the area, commercial warehousing being 60%, and distribution being 10%. Now, specifically for the B8 uses, the B8 use with distribution has a much higher vehicle trip rate. It's around 10 times higher than B8 warehousing. B2 use, again, is also a significantly lower generating use than distribution centres. So just in light of everything we've described about potential uses of the site, the split we're assuming between these uses has a great bearing on the overall vehicle trip generation, the assessment of the impacts, and the impacts on GAL. At this stage, if the split of the B8 distribution and B8 warehousing is neither restricted or cannot be known, it is a concern that this sensitivity is not being tested given the substantial difference in the vehicle trip generated. This is hundreds of vehicles an hour. So we note in CPC's representation notes that the assessment is listed or is described as a worst case, as the assessed area has reduced. However, it is not a worst case. It is a very specific assessment of a very specific mix of uses within the site and of a split of the B8 use. So the highest generating use within B8 has been limited to 10% of the area. Thank you.
National Highways, please.
Sorry, it's John Williams from Steer on behalf of Gatwick Green. Oh, sorry.
Please do.
Thank you, sir. In terms of the policy, it is actually lacking a vision, or at least a requirement for a vision-led approach. The reason I mention that is because that's now an expectation of government policy as spelt out in Department for Transport Circular 01 of 2022, in particular paragraphs 15 and 48. I've heard lots of encouraging sounds about sustainable transport, and the benefit of the vision-led approach is it can set that outcome that the development is trying to achieve, and the outcome in terms of how it can support sustainable travel and active travel. Now, we fully recognise that this is an employment allocation, and we recognise the importance of the strategic road network for the freight and logistics sector, but there will be workers travelling back and forth to the site on a daily basis and using some of the other facilities there. The government is moving away from the predict and provide to the vision and validate process, and that's why we need to see a vision-led approach. It can be easily resolved through a modification, through the master planning work that will accompany the outline permission, setting a requirement for that master plan work to have a vision-led approach. But the benefit is, if you have that vision-led approach up front, you can understand those outcomes. We, as a company, can understand how they're trying to reduce the need to travel by the car, and certainly by the car on the SRN, and being mindful of the SRN shouldn't be used for local trips, paragraph 131 of the circular. But also it benefits the monitor and manage process as the development comes forward, that if you have that vision, you always have that checkpoint as to whether you're keeping track with that vision and when those interventions may be needed to facilitate greater support for those sustainable transport solutions. So I think, it's something which I think there's probably common understanding, but if you capture it in the policy in terms of a requirement for a vision-led approach, that would help this process.
Thank you. Mr. DeWitt, please. Did you have Mr. Williams? Sorry.
Yes, yeah. Thank you, sir. Just to come back on the points regarding trip rates, as I set out earlier, the assessment has a kind of a trip rate budget, as it were, based on the mix that's been identified. It is correct that in the modelling that the parcel distribution has a higher rate identified. I think that's one, when we looked at it, we thought that was a very high rate compared to other parcel distribution centres and rates that we have looked at. But for the modelling purposes and setting the budget, we were happy with that assumption. I have worked on other schemes where the actual trip rate for parcel distribution has been down at kind of 0.65 in the morning and 0.81 in an afternoon and the evening. And that's mainly to do with having surveyed more recent sites and one kind of anomaly in TRICS, which I'm sure you're aware of the TRICS database. There's actually a site in there which is identified as parcel distribution, but it's actually the headquarters for DHL, and it has a very large amount of office space associated with it. So it isn't a pure parcel distribution site. It's often included in the TRICS assessments, but it's actually an anomaly which gives you a much higher rate than if you take that one out. So obviously, if you have less parcel distribution, or even you could probably have 2 to 3 times the amount of parcel distribution for the same amount of trips which are in the model.
Thanks very much. Any, Mr. Cross, please.
Thank you, sir. Just coming back on the vision issue. Our vision for this site in transport terms was established many years ago and actually found a voice through the Appendix 2 of our 2EC4, so I don't have the reference to hand, I'm sorry. The vision was established prior to the publication of Crawley Borough Council's new direction documents and followed the commitment which was around then, and we're going back to 2016-17, to emerging policies that place the active modes and public transport at the forefront of the access and transport strategy for development. And our vision was supported by the commitment of the developer to a significant piece of land now known as a sustainable transport corridor running through the site, which gave safety and priority to pedestrians, cyclists and public transport users, plus the so-called bus hubs, which we inserted into the site at the request of the bus operator. Our very bold and contemporary approach back then is now in line with national, regional and local policies, and in particular actually found voice now through the need to comply with Circular 01/2022. And it is from that which I'm sure, so I've got my glasses on, Mr. DeWitt was quoting when he suggested we do need to publish a vision for the site in those terms. And indeed, I absolutely agree with him, and we were at fault in some senses, sir, because we had the vision before the vision became something we had to have. So we didn't revisit it, and we've fallen foul of that, I suppose, to some extent. So, but we do have a vision for the site. It's always been there, and clearly we need now to make it much more public and much more clear. So I'm grateful to Mr. DeWitt for raising that point and bringing it to your attention.
Ms. LePage.
Again, I just wanted to respond to Mr. DeWitt's request that a requirement for a transport vision is included in the policy. We consider that this is covered particularly through criteria C, but particularly through D, which requires a comprehensive mobility strategy. Obviously, it's different words, but I think that's where we're considering that requirement is met. And then F and G, which talk about public transport facilities, and then pedestrian and cycle routes. And obviously, all combined then with other policies in the plan, particularly the CL policies that I know we're talking about in January, but are looking at comprehensive master planning.
Thank you. I wasn't sure if Mr. Signier wants to come in from the County Council.
Yes, sir. I was just in reference to Mr. DeWitt, reference to the vision and validate. I think Gatwick Green had provided a document that you'll probably find in on the schedules there. I think is Appendix 4B with the Wilke Group. Page 75, I should probably get the reference. That's KD/CS, I think, /01F, if I'm not mistaken. And in there you have a map which basically shows the vision that Gatwick Green had, which I think is I would say probably goes into in lines of them providing a bus hub and also making sure that there's access for pedestrians and cyclists into their sites.
Thank you. Mr. DeWitt.
Thank you, sir. Yes, we did pick up on the mobility strategy, but when we say vision, we're talking about the overall vision for the development and how that delivery will facilitate and enable those more sustainable transport modes, particularly for the local workers. So it's a case of yes, you have these elements, but bring them together in the vision, and for it to have teeth, you need to have that reference to a vision in the local plan, because this will be the council's adopted development plan for implementation. So it'd be advantageous for the council to have that simple modification to say that when the master plan comes forward in support of the outline, we'd expect it to include a vision-led approach to achieve the outcomes that the communities want to see in terms of sustainable travel. I think that's the point. It's a subtle difference. The elements are there, but it's a case of the vision brings them together.
Thanks, Mr. LePage.
As I say, if that's a mod that's considered necessary, then we'd be happy to consider that.
Thank you for that. I mean, I was under the impression there had been a Circular 122 checklist undertaken of this plan that was presented as a statement of common ground, so I'm slightly surprised there's now a need for further modification. But I understand the point you're making, Mr. DeWitt. If you're leaving that with us, and I think I'm coming away with the impression that there may not be too much resistance to a suggested modification along those lines in terms of additional text within the policy on transport vision if it's felt necessary to meet the test of the circular. Just one final question from me on sort of the transport aspect. If we were to conclude, having considered the evidence through these hearing sessions, that there was a higher employment land requirement and therefore a scenario where the full extent of this site should be allocated and potentially released now rather than through the, I think the council's indicating a more sort of phased approach, so the full 44 hectares. Would that necessitate or require, in the view of West Sussex County Council or National Highways or others, revisiting of the transport evidence to underpin such a main modification?
Mr. Cross has referred to a trip budget in the context of this development. So, yeah, but what the transport evidence base has covered is uses generating up to 333 two-way trips in the morning peak and 298 two-way trips in the PM peak. That's prior to application of a sustainable transport strategy. So in practice that would be lower on the basis of the sustainable assumptions which were made in the transport study. It reduces to 312 in the AM peak and 281 in the PM peak. And the units which are used there are car equivalents. So an individual HGV movement is two or more of those. So assessing it in the round. So the transport sensitivity notes on Gatwick Green trip assumptions did look at a higher employment density in terms of the amount of floor space as a proportion of site area. So based on the 13.73 hectares, it estimated that there's about 30% headroom on that. If the original transport study assumed a ratio of 32% floor area to site area, and the technical note on Gatwick Green trip assumptions pushed that up to 40%, and concluded that with the 13.73 hectares, there was about 30% for two-way trips across both peaks, headroom for further increases. But of course, if through the transport assessment it can be demonstrated that a more sustainable mode share can be achieved than the sort of more broad brush assumptions which were used in the overall Crawley transport study, that would help with coming in under those figures. Apart from how the individual subland uses were looked at through the planning application and its supporting assessment. As has been rightly mentioned, the parcels distribution is the most intensive in terms of trips. So if the planning application was purely for commercial warehousing and excluded parcels distribution, then a higher floor area would be permissible within that trip budget. Yeah.
Others want to come in on this point. I'm going to afford the opportunity first to Mr. Williams on behalf of Gatwick Green, and then I'll come to Mr. Ellis on Gatwick Airport.
Yeah, I think I would just really echo probably Guy's points and West Sussex points that the trip budget does allow for that larger floor area. I mean, by way of an example, if you looked at a site which was completely B8 and kind of warehousing, you're probably looking at a floor area of kind of 150 to 180,000 square metres, which would obviously cover the site up to the 40% kind of plot ratio. So there is that element within the trip budget to allow you to have these larger units. And yeah, which is dependent on the market and the need as you go forward.
Thank you. Mr. Ellis, please.
I think my interpretation of what we said was that we haven't assessed 40, it has not been assessed for 44 hectares. What we seem to be making the case is that if you occupy it less densely, you could take a bit more land. I think going back to my original point is what clearly is not assessed is any increase in density or occupation of the site. And I think now we've just established in terms of trip budgets how that is captured in any restrictions upon the site or any policy requirements.
Thank you. Mr. Cross, briefly, please.
It will be very brief, sir. Can I refer you to document ES/ST/01W, which is a transport modelling report, and reports in particular on the sensitivity test carried out that Mr. Parfitt mentioned for Gatwick Green. And I quote, "The task has taken the modelled local plan review scenario 2 being Gatwick Green, with sustainable mitigation and added the DCO development trips and mitigation assumptions. The test has estimated the Gatwick Green employment floor area assumptions as used in the previous testing, i.e. 77,500 square metres GFA." Quite clear, sir, that tests the development of Gatwick Green with the DCO and indeed at its full tested level.
Thank you. Is that a legacy? Another point, Mr. Ellis.
Very quick one. Same document. In paragraph 1.3 and above in 1.2, actually, it references the 77,500 was in relation to a 24.1 hectare site.
Absolutely.
There hasn't been an assessment of 44 hectares of a full density site. That's the bottom line. There's been a trip budget that's arrived at. There hasn't been a TIA above the trip budget. So any release beyond the 13 hectares would have to be subject to the trip budget or a further TIA. That's obvious, isn't it?
Great. Our further agenda items and questions have largely been answered through the written statements that were submitted to us and also discussed yesterday. But I'm mindful that there are others here that may wish to raise issues on the remaining agenda items and questions. Is there anyone who would like to do so?
Thank you, sir. Sorry, I should have put my sign up there, but it's just to pick up on the agricultural land. I think in our statement we've obviously discussed that, but there are some specific sections of the sustainability appraisal that we can just direct you to as additional information, because I don't believe we've mentioned that. Yeah, in particular in the sustainability appraisal, we do consider the agricultural land for both the Gatwick Green site and also land at Fernlands. So that's in the site-specific section at the very back that covers the sites off that you'll be familiar with. And there's also some discussion at paragraphs E34 to E37 as well.
Great, thank you. I had picked that up, so thanks anyway. Any other contributions or comments?
So I won't detain people from lunch for too much longer, but just very briefly under item 9, as we're in the room today, as mentioned on Tuesday at the opening of this examination, the council has prepared or provided various kind of modifications that it's put forward to the plan. Just as we're sitting here today discussing policy EC4, there are effectively 2 modifications in the council's schedule. I think this is document CBL 07. I think we're now on version D, and the modifications that are put forward, I think, is to put in additional text. I think this is to criterion F in relation to requiring the submission of a construction management and phasing plan. I think this is coming from in response to representations from National Highways Regulation 19. And then the further reference is for, or the further modification is for a cross-reference to policy DD5, which is the aerodrome safeguarding policy. In respect of the first, because it is introducing new policy content, I think we would take the view that if we were to conclude that is necessary for soundness, then that would obviously be a main modification that would need to be consulted on. I don't know if anybody has had a brief opportunity to look at those suggested changes or has any comments or resistance to them. I mean, obviously, if that additional text at part F went forward as a main modification, parties would all have an opportunity to comment on that in due course. Mr. Fife?
Yeah, no comments or concerns with those modifications, sir. Only safe to say that we have set out our sort of position on the scale of need and the growth, and the suggested revisions to EC4 contained in Section 7 and Appendix 7 of our representations on EC4. That's our Regulation 19 representations.
Thank you. In all sense, you're probably eager to get some lunch. Just a final point in terms of just the process of proposed modifications that have been raised today, various kind of suggestions. I think we'd just like to make clear 2 scenarios. Our assessment has obviously got to be whether the submitted policy and land area proposed for allocation at policy EC4 is sound, or if it's not. If we arrive at a view that it is not sound, then the issue will be for the Borough Council to determine how it wishes to take the matter forward. It's not for us, or it will not be our remit to say, well, you take this area out and you put this area in. We're assessing the plan as submitted. And similar would apply in the event that were we to arrive at a conclusion that there is a land requirement that is significantly higher than what the plan has been put forward, then again the matter will go to the Borough Council to determine whether it could accommodate that higher requirement within the borough, or whether we're in a scenario where no, we can only go so far, and therefore there's potentially an element of unmet need. I don't want people to leave these hearings under the impression that we would come away and dictate that, well, you know, you take this land area out here and you put this land area in there. It's whether the plan as submitted is sound, and if it's not, then the matter potentially would go back to the Borough Council to resolve. So I thought I'd just clarify that.
Absolutely, and we totally understand that, but we would hope that any of your logic would effectively provide a framework within which we'd make a renewed decision.
Thanks, everyone. We're back at 2 o'clock for the water neutrality session.